With prayer, and then we'll get right into the lesson. Lord, we thank you for another day, and we do thank you for our time here to meet. Thank you for everybody that's able to make it despite the weather going on, and thank you for the safety on the road. We do pray that you'll bless our studies here in your word, and also our time as we continue in the rest of the service. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, right now TJ is handing out some slips of paper. This is for later in the lesson, so be ready. And if you're one that doesn't like to read, hand it to the next person next to you. Okay? Okay? But he's going to work at handing out some papers here. Okay? Darla doesn't get an option. Well, Darla's the only one sitting by herself, so she brought it on herself. So, yeah. Yeah, keeping the boat. That's mean. That is mean. He has been. Okay, well, let's go ahead and start here. I want you to consider some things that the Lord has done up to this point for the children of Israel from the time of the Exodus on, all the way up to the time of the conquest. Give me some things that you can think about. In the Exodus and up to the conquest, there's been lots of things that God has benefited the children of Israel through. Anybody give me some? You talk about the Jordan River? The Red Sea and the Jordan River. Okay, that's two big ones. All right. Okay. Any else? Okay. Did I see your hand? Okay. Say that again. Walls of Jericho. We saw that. Yep. Wouldn't let Balaam curse him. Actually turned it around to a blessing multiple times. Yep. Yes, beat out the giants. We're going to see a little more of that today. Okay? Any others? Okay, so there's been... So would we look at all of this, and there's probably a lot more we could identify, I'm sure, if we were to go through, we would say that God has been consistently good to them despite the way they have been toward Him. Would we agree? Yeah. Would we agree, if I just drew it to an application for us today, that we are the same way? And a lot of times we don't act the way we should act when God is consistently good to you. Right? So, we go, how in the world could they act that way? Well, just stop and ask yourself that. How in the world can I act the way I act at times when God consistently provides, make sure I have a home, make sure I've got food, gives me a church, gives me friends, gives me health, we just go down, protection on the road, all that kind of stuff. We take for granted those things as though that's normal and that's how it always is. But that doesn't happen all the time, does it? And yet God is good to provide all those kinds of things. And sometimes we see, maybe sometimes, miraculous things that happen in our life where we obviously know God is working on our behalf and we didn't even maybe necessarily realize it until we saw that. So we need to have some time where we stop and thank God for the common blessings that we get every day and remember that He's good to us. All right. Now, that's not in my notes. I just wanted to give you that to kind of remind you that this is how God works with His people. And besides that, He doesn't just do that with His people. He does that with, we call it a common grace. He does it with everybody, doesn't He? The Bible says it's the goodness of God that should lead people to repentance when they realize how much they get from Him all the time and maybe don't realize they should give their heart to Him for it. Okay? All right, now let's get in. We're going to continue the conquest. Go to Joshua chapter 11. And we're going to really finish out, for the most part, going to finish out Joshua today. We're going to look at just kind of the conquest completed. There's some major events that do happen that we see in the conquest. Obviously, we looked at some individual ones, Jericho. We looked at Ai, or at least we talked about it for a bit. We talked about the sun standing still and the hailstones coming down and destroying the armies that are fighting, or actually really say fleeing from the Israel at that time. Now, chapter 11, we get to really a summary, and it's going to give a full summary of the conquest. Now, if you were to go to chapter 10, we're not going to do that, but if you were to chapter 10, it kind of picks up right into chapter 11. There's all this one village, one city, one town after another that Israel is conquering, and it gets some of the Canaanites concerned, and they decide they're all going to bunch up together and go to war against Israel to stop them. If you saw that happening in your own homeland and you're watching this invading army that's conquering place after place after place, and you know eventually they're going to get to you, they're coming to a town near you, that's what they're trying to do, is to stop this. Okay? Now, God has already determined judgment's going to come upon them, and He's using the Israelites to accomplish that purpose. So we're going to read really the whole chapter here of chapter 11 and divide it out here into our reading groups. 1 through 5, 6 through 10. I got Bill for 1 through 5, 6 through 10. Darla, 11 through 15. David, 16 to 20. Wayne. And then I'm going to do 21 to 23, real small one. Esther. Okay. All right, go ahead, Bill. J-Bob. J-Bab. That's a big amount. When it says it's the sand of the sea coming against the nation of Israel. All right, next. That's hawk their horses. Yeah, that's how that's pronounced. Hawk. Miss Pothmaim. Yeah. Hawked. Okay, what does it mean to hawk a horse? No. Anybody ever heard of ham hocks? It's basically cut the big tendon in the back so they can't do anything. It's basically cripple the horse. And I think more than it's just crippling the horse, it's just sort of a way of showing we are completely destroying every bit of power you have. So, I mean, if you want to keep your horse, don't do that. They might have put it down more than likely, because you hawk a horse, basically the horse is no good. Yeah, that's what that means, okay? 11. Whoever had that next one. Was that you, Wayne? Oh, David. Okay, go ahead, David.
They smote all the souls that were therein with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was not any left to breathe. And he burnt Hazor with fire. And all the cities of those kings, and all the kings of them, did Joshua take, and smote them with the edge of the sword, and he utterly destroyed them, as Moses the servant of the Lord commanded. But as for the cities that stood still in their strength, Israel burned none of them save Hazor only. That did Joshua burn. And all the spoils of those for a prey unto themselves, but every man they smote with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, neither left they any to breathe. As the Lord commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Joshua, and so did Joshua. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses.
Okay.
So Joshua took all that land of field and all the south country, all the land of Goshen, and the valley of the plain, and Mount Israel, and the valley of the sea, even from Mount Gilead to the hill of Judah, even unto Baal Gad, and the of Lebanon, and from Mount Hermon, and all their feet he took smoke and slew. Joshua made war a long time with all his feet. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Israelites, they happened to forgive them. All others they took in battle. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might destroy them utterly, that they might have no faith, but that he might destroy them, and the Lord commanded Moses.
Okay, 21, 23.
And at that time came Joshua and cut off the Anakims from the mountains, from Hebron, from Beers, from Canaan, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities.
Okay, stop for a second. What are the Anakims?
Giants.
The giants. Remember that? That was the concern they had. All right, go ahead.
There was none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod there remained. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel, according to their divisions by their tribes. The land rested from war.
Does anybody remember the town Gath and how it's famous in the Bible? There's a big guy from that place, Goliath of Gath. He's one of the Anakim. Yep. All right. Let's go ahead and we'll look at this text a little more specifically. Who gathered against all the Israelites to battle? What's the name of the guy, and who's he, or at least who is he, and who's he gathering? The king of Hazor. Okay. And he's gathering who? All the different groups that are basically in the north area, okay, of Canaan. How are the armies described? Verse 4. As the sand of the sea. Yeah, big amount of people. You can't even number. Whenever they say the sand of the sea, there's been a few times we've seen that where God has used that language. He said Israel would become as the sand of the sea, right? And when you see that, it's just a way of saying this is too much to number. Too much to number. Why did such a large army assemble? They want to stop Israel. They want to stop Israel from the conquest. Verse number 1, jump back and look at verse 1. What are those things then in verse 1 referring to? If you remember what I told you, what are they referring to? If you want to look back and look at chapter 10, maybe pick up from verse 4:38, you could see, but what are they referring to? Yeah, all the other cities that have been taken when they saw those things happening. Okay? Why did God say to Joshua, or what did God say to Joshua? I'm sorry, read my question right. What did God say to Joshua found in verse number 6? Do not be afraid. And that is a common statement we will see him doing. In fact, he's done several times up to this point in the text in the book of Joshua. Let me give you some references. You'll see either do not be afraid or I will give them into your hand, or sometimes a combination of both, sort of as a way of assuring that. Let me give you a few references. Be ready to read them real quick and you can see it. 1:9. Who wants to get that one? Joshua 1:9. I know I'm throwing you in here. Joshua, can you quote it? 1:9. Okay, go ahead. And the next one's 6:2. Who can do 6:2 while we're waiting on T-Day? Okay, Shy. 8:1 after that one. Who can do that one? Melissa. 8:18. 8:18. Fred? Okay. And then 10:8. Who can do 10:8? Okay, Bill. All right, go ahead and read those real quick. I know this isn't in the notes so much, but this is good. All right, go ahead. All right, good. Don't be afraid. Shy. Yep. Okay, I've given them into your hand. All right, 8:1. Eight 18. Okay, 10:8. Okay, so why do you think God has to keep saying that over and over and over? Because we have a tendency to forget, don't we? We have a tendency to get fearful, even though we've seen God be faithful in the past. And isn't that good that God is willing to humble Himself enough to keep coming back and saying that to us, or at least He's not saying, "I'm God, can't you understand this?" He just keeps coming back and just being patient with weak people. Thank the Lord for that, because we don't deserve His long suffering and patience with our struggle of trust, right? And oftentimes you'll see that Joshua passes that same message on to the armies that the Lord Himself has given to Joshua. Okay? He already said, "I'm going to do that." Just He needed it basically every time they fought. All right. So what is the extent of the success God gave regarding this battle, or the battle that we see? Verse 6. That God is saying He's going to do for them. Verse 6. Be not afraid of them. And then what does He say is going to happen? When is He going to do it? Tomorrow. This will be resolved tomorrow. I will deliver them all slain tomorrow. Sort of a way of saying, you will win. How is the initial action of the battle described? Verse 7. This kind of gives you an idea how they did it. Yeah, it was sudden there. It says all the men of war with him, it says they came by the waters of Merom suddenly and fell upon them. Suddenly. The idea is that they weren't expecting Israel to suddenly come after them. There was a kind of a fast approaching army that happened here. They were all hiding in the water and they ran out, huh? There you go. There you go. 8:9 here we see, verses 8 and 9, it tells us how the battle went. How did the battle go? They smote them, chased them, smote them, says it again, hawked their horses, burnt their chariots with fire. None remaining. The whole sand of sea was gone. Water washed them all away. What was the result in Hazor? They burned Hazor with fire. Why did they go after Hazor? That's the city that had the king that was the main leader. Yeah. The leader of them all. They just burned it down to the ground, like they did with Jericho. You remember that? Did the same thing with Jericho. Just burned it. Completely destroyed it. Then verses 12 to 15, I want you to kind of take a moment to look at that and kind of give me what you think that's a description of, or how it's giving us all of this together. Look at verses 12 to 15. I'll give about 10 seconds, 20 seconds. And you read that, and then I want you to give me what you think how that's being used, or what's the function of those verses 12 to 15. You already got it? Well, you're a fast reader. Okay, go ahead. Okay. So yeah, this is a summary of what God told Moses that now Joshua is doing, right? That's what it's saying. Because what we're hearing here, or what we're seeing described in this battle, is not something that was just brand new planned. It was something that God told Moses before he died, this is what's going to happen. You're going to go into the land of Canaan, and you're going to basically consume everything. You're going to destroy it all. Nothing's going to be left. And now we see Joshua fulfilling the promise that God gave through Moses. Now, the same way, what's the function of 16 to 20? Okay. So this maybe you could almost say is a central verse, or central set of verses in the entire book of Joshua. This is really a summary of all the conquest of Joshua. It's basically saying this is how Joshua did, and it's kind of concluding it in a lot of ways, saying that this is it. Now, there's a lot more that goes on in the book of Joshua that we're going to read, but really, for the most part, battles are for the most part done. Are there more battles? Yes, there will be more battles, but we could say it this way: they've conquered every major portion that needs to be conquered. Every major city, every major people, and all that remains, as we're going to see a little bit later, are just little bits of groups here and there, little ragtag groups that need to be dealt with. But the big armies, the big threats, the big people that they need to deal with, for the most part, have been dealt with. And one of the means by which how they have been dealt with is that God, it says here, did something to the hearts. What's it say in verse 20? Harden their hearts. He actually turned them against Israel so that they wouldn't repent or humble their heart to Israel and seek peace. Now, there's only one it mentions that did. And it doesn't say any more about them. I don't know exactly what happened there. If maybe they were made slaves like the Gibeonites were, I don't know. But for the rest, but basically, everybody else decided to fight to the death, and that's exactly what happened. They died. They went against Israel, and Israel smote them. And that was God's intention, to happen that way, that they would be destroyed. Now, we saw that it was in the battle that was against the sand of the sea. That was a one-day battle. But here, in this summary passage that we're looking at, how long does it take? Yeah. Joshua made war a long time. So we're talking about the conquest over the entire land of Canaan. It didn't just happen in a few weeks. It was a long time. Yes. No, I'm saying they destroyed everything in the sense of all the enemies in that sense. But it also says there, what you're talking about with the cities, is they conquered them and took them as their own possessions. Yeah, they took them as their own possessions. But there's also the warning that you don't learn their practices, so there were some things that were destroyed in that sense. They weren't supposed to be worshiping their idols, so probably they're going to hopefully burn that garbage and get rid of all that stuff out, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's really kind of the summary here. Now, one other group that's mentioned here, and we said it right at the very end, 21 to 23. What group? The Anakim. They were the ones that the 12 spies, or 10 of the 12 spies, were all afraid of. You remember that? And caused the rest of the nation of Israel to basically mourn and gripe and doubt that God could ever deliver them. And what does it say happened? They were destroyed, except for the ones that were driven away. And we do obviously see that there's some that still hang around, and we get all the way to the book of 1 Samuel, and there's one major one still around, don't we? Goliath of Gath, and it says he also has 5 brothers. So we know that there's still a few of those giants still remaining. You remember in the book of Genesis, chapter number 6, it talks about that there being mighty men, men of renown. And it says, and there were giants in the land. Listen to the line it says here. This is Moses writing, but listen what he says. Genesis 6, came to pass that when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, his daughters were born unto them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair to look upon the wives which they had chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man. Then verse 4, it says, and there were giants in the earth in those days. And look at the next line. And also after that. Now, he's saying after those days, there were still giants. Now, they didn't come from this group. Why did they not come from this group? Because the flood destroyed everything. But after that, there would still be giants, and that's a reference to what we're looking at now. Yes? Probably, yeah. They were probably their special warriors, maybe generals, leaders of big armies. That might have been something that how they were used, or maybe they were gladiator type people that were used to fight big battles and scare off enemies. I mean, when you got a guy that's 10 foot tall walking around, and we saw the other guy, you remember the other guy, the one who was the Anakim on the other side, that he had a bed that was 13 foot long. Og, king of Bashan, yeah. And we find out he's a gigantic dude as well, yeah. Out of Noah's family. Yeah, they obviously still had some genes, some tall genes in them. Yeah, I mean, every once in a while we get a tall person that we see around, don't we? Anybody remember those 2 tall people we had come to church for a little while? They had to crouch when they walked under the doorway. There's a tall lady and a tall man, like 6'8", 6'9". Yeah, and that's odd because a lot of Chinese people are short. To have a real tall guy that's like 7 foot tall. Yeah, that's an unusual. That's an anomaly. That doesn't happen normal. That's why giants are special, because you don't see them very often. Yeah. Okay, but obviously there was a family of them that just continually kind of had their way in the land of Canaan for a while.
Did they all start playing basketball together?
Probably did. Yep. All right. So let's go to chapter 14, verses 6 to 15. We're going to do our best to try to get done. There's a lot that they gave in this lesson today, so we're going to see what we can get done. All right, 6 to 15. This is really what you could call a postscript to that summary we looked at in chapter number 11. And this postscript is something that not only is the continuing conquering of the territory of the Anakim that we see, but it's something with Caleb and Joshua, and it's a conversation we get a chance to look at as they're coming to the end or in the process of conquering. Caleb and Joshua have a conversation. So look at verse number 6 to 15. If I can get someone to do 6 to 10, okay, and then 11 to 15. Okay, 11 to 15. All right, go. Jephunah. Kadesh Barnea. To a spy. His spy, yep. Okay, stop for a minute. What is he talking about here? He was one of the two spies, one of the 10, one of the 12, but he's one of the two that were good. Who was the other one? It was Joshua. Okay, that's what he's talking about. Go ahead there, Bill. Okay, stop right there. He was 40 when he went and he spied. What happened in the wilderness? How long did they have to stay in the wilderness? 40 years, and now it's 5 years since that point. So how long has it been since they've been in the land of Canaan? For 5 years. So they've been fighting this battle for 5 years at least. And but Caleb is still strong, as we see here. Go ahead. Who had the next one? Was that? Yeah. Jephthah. Kirjath Arba. Okay, so this kind of summarizes. So we could almost say the conquest of Joshua was about a 5-year period. Okay? And then they're done. When it says they had rest from war, it means the war's over with. Yeah. So let's talk about this for a second. We're not going to be long into this one. But so what grounds did Caleb give for the requesting of the plot of land? Okay, so he's recounting, he's talking about the grounds here. I'm sorry, what was given to him or what was promised to him was the land he walked over when he spied, right? And basically, when Moses was saying everybody else is going to be staying in the wilderness and dying in the wilderness, he made a promise to Caleb, you won't, because you wholly followed the Lord. You trusted God, you believed God. You'll wander in the wilderness, but you will make it into the land. And he does make it into the land. And how does Caleb basically assess himself at this point after they've fought for 5 years? And he's been 40 years before that waiting. He's just as strong as he was 40 years ago when he was or 80 years ago when he was spying out the land. Is it 80 years? No, 45 years ago. Sorry, 45 years. Say it right. He's 85. 45 years earlier, he says, I'm just as strong then. He'd be like Bill, right? I've watched Bill do push-ups and beat every boy. So the land he wants is the land of the Anakim, the hill country. He wants that area where we do see in chapter 11, they defeated them and drove them out, the ones that didn't get captured. Yeah. And so God gives him that. So we see that kind of thing. So we're really basically done with the whole conquest of Joshua up to this point. So now they are at rest. I like that last little line here. They have rest from war. When they got into the land of Canaan, they didn't get to go in. It was not the land of rest yet. When they got in the land of Canaan, it was a land of war. And they had to war, it says there, for a long time, and a long time appears to be about 5 years. They had to fight and fight and fight. And the land, for the most part, had rest. Now, there were, like I said, little small groups scattered throughout, which Joshua talks about a little bit later, that the rest of Israel needed to finish and deal with. But that was nothing big like it was before. He even gives the freedom for the other two tribes that are on the other side of the Jordan to go back. They were told they couldn't just stay in their little conquered land and not fight with the rest of their siblings. They had to fight. And so for 5 years they have been fighting, and they're basically done with war. Now it's left to the individual tribes where they're scattered to finish out the rest of the conquest. And it's not gigantic, big conquest like it was before, right? You don't have the sand of the sea-size armies coming against them anymore. Does that make sense? Okay? That's where they're at. Now, I like the idea that I said about the rest, because it's similar to the way when we think about the creation of God, that He worked for 6 days, and then when His work was done, He rested. And that's similar also to our salvation. The Bible says that we enter into a rest with God from our labors. We're no longer under that bondage we once were under before in that rest. So that's just kind of a little bit of a side note thrown in there, the Sabbath rest that we get. All right, now we have a activity. I'm going to do my best to get through it as quick as we can. Pass this out real quick. And if I can have Andrew come and pass the other part out, because that way we don't have to wait. This, I'm asking you not to mess with this right now. You've seen one of these before because we had an activity earlier that was like this. But take that and don't mess with it until we get to the next activity. I told you, sometimes they pack these lessons so full we need an hour and a half to do it. So I have to cut through some of this. Now, it's got 4 questions on this, promises that are kept, or promises fulfilled activity. 4 promises that are given, or 4, not promises, but promises that God made to Abraham that we see beginning to be fulfilled in the person of Joshua, or in the conquest of Joshua happening. Now, someone read that little sentence there at the front to see what those promises are. You have 3 of them mentioned. Go ahead, Bill. Okay, so I'm going to just do my best to explain these because I want to give us enough time to do the last activity. They gave us 2 activities to do. I'm going to try to do the last one, and it'll take us a little longer than this one. So, number 1, how did the prophecy about the land in Genesis 15, 17 to 21 find its fulfillment in Joshua 21, 43 to 45? Genesis 15 is what's the area where the Abrahamic covenant is given, where God promises the land, and He actually gives the boundaries of the land. He says from the river of Egypt on the south to the Euphrates in the north and all the territory in between. All of that is where you are going to have, and then He says, and by the Great Sea, which is the Sea of the Mediterranean Sea. Okay? So you got all of this that is promised that they are going to get to have as their land. Now, if I can get someone to read the Joshua 21, 43 to 45 passage real quick. We're not going to worry about the Genesis 15, but I want you to see the fulfillment of it. Anybody? Okay, Wayne? 43 to 45. So I want you to think about how big that land is. They conquered that in 5 years. Land all the way takes us all the way down to almost Egypt, all the way up to all the way over to the Euphrates River, which kind of runs off to one side. Then you have the Red Sea and the Dead Sea, not Red Sea. I'm sorry, Mediterranean Sea. You got the Red, Dead, and Med. The Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea, all kind of as boundaries going around it, and exactly what they were promised, they got. They got. And some people have said God never gave them all the land. Well, what's that promise tell us? In the time of Joshua, they had it all. They conquered every bit God said they would have in the days of Joshua. So was the first promise fulfilled? The land? Okay. Now the second one here is a little more complicated, and I really did not understand fully this, but I really worked hard through this question to try to understand what they're trying to say. But look at... if you were to look back at Genesis 17, 1-8, he gives a list of people that are going to be captured or taken. And it says in Genesis 17, 1-8, it gives a whole list. I'll give you them. You got the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, Perizzites, the Rephaims, the Ammonites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites, that they were going to capture. And I believe that's where that says that. And then in the text in Joshua 23, it's a long text, so we're not going to read it all. He basically tells them and recounts all those different names that they've captured, and he also begins to divide them out into the land and say, this is where you're going to go, and you're going to take those different portions of the land, and he warns them while they're there, don't become like them. Don't become like them. Now, this could really be a fulfillment of a couple things. One, the land, but also, two, the nation. That God has given them, just as God promised to Abraham, you're going to be a mighty nation. You're going to be a nation that's the size of the sand of the sea. They're already there. They were already there in Exodus. Remember that? In the land of Egypt. They were multiplying and multiplying. And when they came out, there were 603,000 men that were above 20. And men of war. That's a big war. That's a big army right there. And then that's not with women and children and others that were not men of war at that point, right? So they were already big. So now they are becoming an official nation living in this land. That's kind of the idea of what the text is. It's a little complicated. I've had trouble fully connecting the dots of this. I went through it. I spent probably 30 minutes trying to figure out the meaning of number 2. Sometimes their reasoning was a little different than what I understood. All right, let me give you a third one. Number 3 says, how did the sign of the covenant in Genesis 17, 9-14, the sign of the covenant to Abraham was what? To all the males. Circumcision. Find its fulfillment in Joshua 5, 1-9. Well, let me explain. Remember, for 40 years, they're wandering in the wilderness. All the parents are dying off. There's kids still being born in that time, 40 years. One thing that doesn't happen during that 40 years is young boys aren't being circumcised. So before they even begin the conquest, Joshua chapter 5, God says, you need to go through that whole process again for those that never got circumcised. Why? Because they're not like the rest of the nations. They're a covenant people. And so you have this new nation that takes over. Now, again, this is, you say, what is this promise fulfillment? Really, I don't know what exactly it means, but it's sort of a way of saying this is the nation now. This is the full nation of Israel. This is the nation that's set apart that God promised to Abraham, and it's there in the land of Canaan. Okay? Now, I want you to think about the significance of all this. Abraham, at this point, didn't even have a child. He's nearly 100 years old. And he's being told, you're going to have a nation the size of the sea, of the sand of the sea, and it's going to be powerful. It's going to conquer as far as east, west, north, and south. He's not even got a child. And now, 400 plus years later, that's exactly beginning to play out. Yeah. This is God's, after it was wiped out in a 40-year process. This is God being faithful to keep a promise. Now, there's one more. I know these are just promises beginning to be fulfilled. There's one more promise, and we know that we got the land promise they got, the nation promise, which we're going to see both in number 2 and number 3. The last one is the seed promise. Let's look at this. He said, did the promise of the seed found in Genesis chapter 12, 1-3. If you remember Genesis 12, 1-3, he says, I'm going to bless them that bless you, curse them that curse you. In thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. What seed is he referring to? Jesus Christ is going to come through you and is going to bless all the families of the earth through you. Has it found its fulfillment in Joshua? Not yet. It won't find its fulfillment for quite a bit of time still. So that's one promise yet to be fulfilled, right? So in the conquest of Joshua, we've seen at least 2 of those promises. We've seen a big nation, and we've seen the land be given. Okay? And we're still waiting for the third one. When does the third one happen? In the days of the New Testament, right? Which takes us Abraham. From Abraham's time, it's about 2,000 years to Christ. We've been looking at about 400 years after Abraham's time, so we're about 1,600 years time still, right? That they still have to wait to see that fulfillment. All right, the last one, I gave you they passed out a bunch of papers, or a bunch of little strips. We did something like this when we were talking about in the days of Moses when they were dividing out the land. I gave you both sides, so we don't have to go through the whole process of figuring out where they are, but if you want to try to figure it out, I'll leave you the blanks. So if you feel like not doing that hard work, you can turn your paper over and see what the names are. But I've got a bunch of, once they conquered the land, they began the process of dividing out the land. All right, so let's look at how they did that. Who has the Joshua 13, 1-7 passage? If you got your passages, get ready to read. Okay, can you help him with that? It's going to be a longer read. Why don't you read it real loud for him? If you have if you know your order, the next one's going to be Joshua 13, 14. They're just going to follow in order, basically. Who's got 13, 14? Okay, Andrew. 13, 15-16. Who's got that one? Okay, Shai. Let me just give you a few in the head. And then 24-25. Okay, Melissa has that. All right, go ahead and read that one, Mom, for him real quick. Drop down to verse 7. Actually, drop down in the middle of verse 6. Only divide. You go ahead and start from there. Only divide thou. Okay, so some of the tribes have already gained their land, but 9.5 of them have not. Now we say half tribe. What do we mean half tribe? Half brothers. There were 2 half tribes. What were the half tribes? They were Joshua's sons. You got Ephraim and Manasseh. Those are the half tribes. Okay, so that's because it's called also the tribe of Joshua. The tribe of Joshua is made up of 2 half tribes. Okay, if that makes sense for you. All right, so let's look at some of the things. Verse 14. The first part we saw was the call to divide the rest of it out. Verse 14. Whoever had that one? Andrew. Okay, go ahead. Are there? Okay, so what do we learn about the Levites? They get no land, but what do they get? They get free food. The sacrifices that are offered, they get to eat of that. That's how they are provided for. They don't provide their own food in the sense of work for it raise it or be in charge of it. They get it out of the sacrifice. Okay, 15 and 16. Okay, so there's more that goes on here, and if you really knew where all the cities were, you would kind of see that. But if you want to figure out where Reuben is, on the defined side, you see it's over on the opposite side of what we normally call the land of Canaan. It's on the other side of the Dead Sea. Okay, they get that land, and they were still waiting to give that land. All right, 24, 25. Who had that one? Okay, so who are we giving this one to? Gad. And again, Gad is just north of Reuben. Okay, you see that? All right, so you got that on there, right along the edge of the Jordan River. Okay? Who has 29 to 30? 29 and 30 of chapter 13. Who did? Somebody should. Who? You do? Okay, go ahead. Okay, so you got, there's actually two portions of land there for Manasseh. Do you see that? You got East Manasseh and West Manasseh. Now, you might remember that when we did this a few months ago, okay? And so we're looking at the east side in that one, okay? You'll see it in just a minute. Actually, you'll see it in the next text. Look at verse 14, 1 to 5. Who's got the 14, 1 to 5? Okay, real loud for us so everybody else can hear it. You'll see why they got what they got. Eleazar. Distributed. Okay, look at verse 2. Really read that one out real loud. Okay, stop right there. By lot. What is the lot? Those who were here on Thursday night might remember what the lot is. It's basically drawing straws, casting dice, little pieces that are cast down. So how do they decide the land portions? They cast lots for it. Okay, now there is something else we'll see in just a minute that they also used to get the land, but part of it was by casting lots. They basically rolled the dice, and whatever it fell on, that became your land. Okay? And one of the things it says in the book of Proverbs about the lot is that it also stops disputes, because everybody gets a fair chance at it. And whatever it comes out to, that's your portion, and you can't dispute it anymore. It's the way it fell. I'm just going to go with it. Don't dispute it. Don't dispute it now. Yeah, he's the one. Yeah, and that what might remind you that you remember Ephraim and Manasseh, that one of the things that Jacob promised when he gave the blessings is that he would get the double portion over his brother. So that might be part of why this is playing out that way as well. Okay. All right, the next one's Judah, 15:1-3. I'm going to do our best here. Go ahead. Let's just stop there. Do you see they're connected to the Salt Sea? What's the Salt Sea? It's the Dead Sea, and the other side is the Mediterranean. So they have the Dead and the Med. They're connected to. Okay, so go ahead, and that's that one. All right, then we have Ephraim. I know we're running short on time here. We'll just do our quick here. Let's do 16:1. 16:1. Who has that one? All right, go ahead. Mount Bethel, and then if you had 5 and 6, it's specifically talking about which lot or which tribe of Joseph. It is Ephraim, okay? And so we see Ephraim there kind of in the middle, okay? We're going to look at West Manasseh. This is 17:1-2. Okay, go ahead. Okay, we'll count that you got the verse if we're just running short on time. So where's the West Manasseh? You see it's along the side of the Jordan River. And again, this is by lot. Okay, I want you to see another reason why they divided it out the way they did. This is a long one, but if you had 18:1-10, I'm not going to have you read it, but the 18:1-10 is they surveyed the land. So it said that Joshua sent out people to go and survey the remaining land and divide it off. So part of it was decided by lot, part of it was decided by a surveyor, or at least they surveyed it and they divided it in portions, and then the lot settled the matter of who got what. Okay, so that's why the land is divided the way it is. And when you see it looks kind of jagged and weird, go and look at our states. Not all our states are straight lines all the way around. They're divided, and usually how they're divided, landmarks, or rivers, or might have been somebody's property at some point in time that moved it or jutted it out in its distance. Huh? A lot of it is straight lines, but over on the 13 original colonies, it's not anything like that, right? For the most part. Find a straight line. Yeah, there's no straight lines, really. Yeah. Okay. So it keeps going on. I'm going to finish it off by just telling you, if you want to look at the other ones, it's just giving you a list by list by list. One more thing we are told, Joshua 21:1-5, it tells us about the Levites one more time and what they are given in a sense of what they can live in. It talks about different cities that they are given. And the cities are scattered throughout all the different tribes. And later those cities will be called, anybody know what they're called? Sanctuary cities, or cities of refuge. And they are legitimate sanctuary cities. Not those for bad criminals so they can hide out from the law, but for those who accidentally take someone's life and are awaiting trial. That's how that works. Okay? All right. Well, we're going to close at that. I told you they overloaded it this week with lesson material. So I hope that's helpful. If you want to look up more of those things, or if you want that list of all those verses, you come get me. I'll print it off for you, and you can take it and look them up on your own time. But thank you for taking the time. We went about 3 minutes longer than we normally should. Okay. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. Mr. Fred, Brother Fred, can you close us in prayer?